The spark of belief, when two worlds collided and became one. There are some love stories that begin with fireworks, loud, dramatic, impossible to miss, but Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban's story began with something gentler, quieter, like a slow sunrise over a life that had been waiting too long for light. It was January 2005, and the ballroom of the G'day USA Gala shimmered with the kind of glamour that only Hollywood and Australia together could create. Nicole, the newly crowned Oscar winner still carrying the invisible bruises of a very public heartbreak, walked in radiant and distant all at once. Her smile, though dazzling, carried a trace of solitude, the kind that comes after loving too hard and losing too painfully. Keith Urban was there too, the golden-haired country musician from Queensland whose fame was on the rise. Beneath his easy smile and guitar-calloused fingers, he carried his own battle scars, years of self-doubt, addiction struggles, and loneliness that often followed him off stage. When he saw her, he later said, "She looked like someone I'd known my whole life but hadn't met yet." Their first encounter was brief, polite introductions. Laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, yet something unmistakable passed between them. Nicole felt it too. "I remember thinking," she later confessed, "this man is gentle, but there's a storm behind his eyes." And then, silence. 4 long months of it. Keith didn't call, not because he didn't care, but because he was afraid of ruining something that felt too good to be real. Nicole assumed he wasn't interested. "He must have forgotten me," she told a friend at the time, half joking, half wounded. But when his call finally came, everything changed. That phone call, shy, hesitant, genuine, became the beginning of something that would define nearly 2 decades of their lives. Within weeks, the two were inseparable. They took long drives through Nashville backroads, escaping the glare of paparazzi and finding comfort in ordinary things, coffee shops, quiet laughter, songs written at midnight. Keith would play her old country melodies. She would listen with her head on his shoulder, saying softly, "You sing like you mean every word." In June 2006, beneath the soft glow of 1,000 candles in a Sydney chapel, they said, "I do." It was not a celebrity spectacle. There were no exclusive photographers, no grand fireworks, just love, raw and trembling. Nicole, in a vintage lace gown, walked down the aisle toward the man who couldn't take his eyes off her. Keith, visibly emotional, whispered as she reached him, "I'm the luckiest man alive." The wedding was everything fame was not: simple, sacred, and filled with quiet sincerity. As the world watched from afar, the couple became something of a fairy tale, proof that two people, broken in different ways, could find wholeness together. They weren't just a marriage, they were a redemption story. For the next few years, they embodied the dream. They laughed easily in interviews, held hands on red carpets, and kissed on stage as fans cheered. Nicole would often say, "He saved me from loneliness," while Keith would call her, "my North Star." Together, they became Hollywood's golden couple, the reminder that love could still exist in a world built on pretense. But behind the perfect images, the award nights, the smiles, the glowing magazine covers, something deeper and more fragile was beginning to stir. Nicole's belief in love had been rekindled, but Keith's old demons had not entirely gone. The very thing that had brought them together, the need to be healed, would soon test the limits of their devotion. They had promised to choose each other every day. But the truth about love, especially the kind that saves you, is that it always demands more than words. And for Nicole and Keith, the fairy tale was about to learn what forever truly costs. The breaking point, when love became survival. For the first few months after their breathtaking Sydney wedding, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban seemed to live inside a dream. Every appearance glowed with happiness, a movie star and a country troubadour walking hand in hand through the chaos of fame. But beneath the sparkle, cracks were forming, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. It began with small things. Late-night calls that went unanswered. Quiet tension that crept into conversations. The occasional look of distance in Keith's eyes. Nicole, who had always trusted her intuition, felt something shifting. She described it later as the ache you feel when the person beside you is present, but already halfway gone. Just 4 months into their marriage, her world tilted. Keith confessed he was struggling, not with fame or pressure, but with something far darker. His old battle with addiction had returned. The revelation hit Nicole like a storm. She had built her entire hope of love on this man, the one who had promised stability after years of heartbreak. To discover that he was fighting demons she could not see broke her heart, and yet she didn't run. Most people would have, but Nicole had spent her entire adult life playing women who endured, who fought for love even when it hurt. Now, that resilience wasn't a role, it was survival. She organized a private intervention. Away from cameras, away from judgment. Friends described it as a night of truth, tears, and no makeup. I told him I didn't care about fame, about appearances, about any of it, Nicole later revealed. I just wanted him to be alive. Keith agreed to seek help, checking into rehab for 3 months. It was the first major test of their marriage, one that would define its rhythm for years to come. While he was away, Nicole visited quietly, avoiding press, bringing letters, photographs, and small gifts. She never made him feel like a failure. A close friend said, she made him feel like a man worth saving. When Keith finally emerged, sober and grateful, they appeared stronger than ever. But something had changed. They were no longer a fairy tale. They were two survivors rebuilding a fragile world. For Nicole, the experience deepened her love but also planted seeds of fear. She had found happiness, but now she understood how easily it could vanish. She threw herself into family life, Sunday dinners, long walks, and motherhood. For Keith, it was redemption. She's my rock, he said often. She saved my life. And he meant it. Their love evolved from glittering red carpets to the quiet endurance of real life. They learned to talk about things no one wanted to hear: relapse, trust, exhaustion, forgiveness. Nicole once told a journalist, "Marriage isn't about perfection, it's about staying when you could leave." The world watched as they seemed to overcome the impossible. When they stood together at award shows, smiling, holding hands, it was no longer just performance, it was a small miracle. But privately, the cost of that miracle was beginning to show. The recovery brought Keith clarity but also guilt. Fame returned, so did the temptations of constant travel and late nights. Nicole, meanwhile, was balancing motherhood and an ever-demanding career. The woman who had once said she wanted a quiet life in Nashville was once again flying across continents for film shoots. Her family life squeezed between time zones. Friends close to the couple began to notice that love, once effortless, had become deliberate, something they worked at like a delicate sculpture that could crack with one wrong move. Keith described it as holding something beautiful with both hands, knowing it could shatter. They had survived the storm, but in its wake came silence. The kind of silence that grows between two people who have fought too long to keep things together. Nicole once said, almost prophetically, "You think love will save you. But sometimes, it just teaches you what you're willing to lose." And though they never said it aloud, both knew, survival had changed them. The fire that once burned brightly had cooled into something quieter, heavier, and far more fragile. The world still saw them as Hollywood's golden couple. But behind closed doors, the fairy tale had turned into something else, all along. Tender endurance. The quiet disappearance. When forever turned into goodbye. By the time their marriage reached its 19th year, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had become something almost mythic, the rare Hollywood couple who had survived everything: addiction, fame, distance, and the relentless scrutiny of a world that didn't believe in forever. But even legends can grow tired. Even love stories can fade. Not with a storm, but with a sigh. Their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, had become the heart of their lives, grounding them in an ordinary rhythm the cameras could never capture: school runs, piano recitals, bedtime stories whispered between flights and tours. Keith once said, "They're the reason I still believe in something bigger than myself." And for a long time, that belief was enough to hold them together. But by 2024, something had changed. The red carpet smiles grew rarer. The space between them, once filled with laughter and private jokes, began to stretch like an unspoken distance. Nicole was filming in Europe for months at a time, often seen walking alone through London streets or dining quietly with her crew. Keith, meanwhile, threw himself into his music, endless tours, late nights in Nashville, the comfort of crowds that cheered but never really knew him. Whispers began to surface, gentle at first, then louder. Sources close to the couple said Keith had set up a separate place in Tennessee, somewhere to write and think. Nicole, ever graceful, neither confirmed nor denied, but in one interview, her eyes lowered as she said softly, "You think you know where your life is going. And then, it isn't." To the public, it was just another soundbite. But to those who listened closely, it was a confession, the sound of a woman trying to make peace with an ending she had never imagined. They didn't fight publicly. There were no scandals, no betrayals, no cruel headlines. What ended them wasn't destruction, it was erosion. The slow wearing away of connection. The quiet realization that the person you once leaned on has drifted just out of reach. In early 2025, the signs were unmistakable. At a film premiere in Sydney, Nicole arrived alone. Her wedding ring, once a constant symbol of devotion, was gone. The next day, Keith appeared on a morning radio show. When asked how he kept the marriage strong, he smiled politely and said, "It's a job," 3 words that felt like a full confession. Later, during another interview, host Amanda Keller asked him if he believed fate had brought them together. He paused, too long. Then he laughed lightly, but the laughter never reached his eyes. "No idea," he muttered. The awkward silence that followed said everything. The man who once described Nicole as his soul anchor had run out of words. Their final public appearance together came that September, a charity gala in New York. They posed side by side. But the warmth was gone. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. His gaze seemed elsewhere. Photographers noted the stillness, the strange stiffness, in their bodies. It was the kind of distance that no amount of smiling could disguise. And then came silence, the kind that feels permanent. No joint statements, no social media explanations, just a slow fade from each other's lives. In October, sources quietly confirmed that Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had finalized their divorce, ending one of Hollywood's most enduring marriages. There was no bitterness, only exhaustion, the quiet agreement between two people who had once saved each other, and now had nothing left to save. Nicole's final words on the subject came in a soft whisper during a red carpet interview. When asked if she still loved him, she smiled, that familiar, luminous smile that always carried traces of sadness, and said, "He's my deep, deep love." Then she walked away. Keith's answer came weeks later, in a different form. Asked about his personal life, he simply said, "Life's in session." He didn't deny, he didn't defend, he just accepted. In the end, theirs wasn't a story of betrayal or tragedy, it was a story of two people who loved deeply and then, quietly, stopped being able to reach each other. Their love didn't explode, it exhaled. Now, they live separate lives but share one constant bond, their daughters. Both have agreed to keep their family out of the spotlight, focusing instead on co-parenting with gentleness. A friend close to Nicole said, "She isn't bitter, she's peaceful. She's grateful for the years that worked." Keith, on the other hand, has returned to the road, pouring his heart into his music once again. Some nights, when he performs, "Making Memories of Us," fans say his voice trembles on the final verse. Because maybe that's what remains when the fairy tale fades, not anger, not regret, but gratitude. Gratitude for the years they defied the odds. For the nights they made each other laugh. For the home they built, even if it couldn't last. Their story doesn't end with heartbreak. It ends with understanding that love, no matter how golden, can change form and still mean everything. And so, as Nicole walks forward with quiet grace and Keith plays his guitar beneath the stage lights, they both carry the same truth. Sometimes forever is shorter than we hoped, but it's still forever while it lasts.